Hi, Tim Horschler, the Voyager Trading with a short video here. We're going to be addressing today two things. One would be a second alternative way of attaching your warp and the dowel that you use with the warp helper to the back beam of your loom. And the second will be a much better way of building a foundation on the back beam as you wind on your warp. Traditionally, what you have you do is we supply short strings or cords with your harp, and we ask you to trim them up to identical lengths and then to join them with heat so that you've got a loop of string, and they're all the same circumference around them. And as you bring your warp through the heddle and place loops on your dowel stick here, what we do is we attach these loops to the back beam, and we do this once and we leave them on the loom like this. So it's just pulled through itself, and then we bring this loop up here and we fold it back on itself so we get a little self-contained loop, and then that loop goes on the end of the dowel. And we would do that, we would put these strings on as we come across the dowel, as we're putting the loops of the ends, the yarn, as it comes through the heddle. So on this 16-inch loop, we'd be using 4 of these. On the larger looms, 5 and 6. And the advantage of this method is that these loops are identical in length, which causes the dowel to be consistent in distance from the back beam. As you bring this to the back beam, the dowel will remain parallel with the back beam, and it just ensures that when you wind on, you're doing it the proper way. So these strings are put on this warp helping dowel as you come across. An alternative method, one of probably a half a dozen or more, because there's always different ways to do things in weaving, is to use a much longer string for the front and for the back. And for the 16-inch harp, we suggest a string that's about 70 inches long. For the 24-inch, make it 90 inches, and then for the 32-inch loom, make it 110, 115 inches. And on both ends, you're going to be tying just a small loop here that will allow you to secure this to the beam. You're also going to need to do the following, and it's pretty straightforward. You need 4 small screws with a fairly large head on them, and half-inch long, and maybe a number 6 and number 8 screw. And you come in about a half an inch or so from the side frames, drill yourself a little pilot hole, and attach those screws here, both to the rear and to the front. And we're going to use those screws to secure this string. We've got this loop over here. We've pulled it through the holes that are in the dowel here, and we're just going to loop it over the head of that, take the slack out, and now we're simply going to go up to the dowel and sew through it, a little zigzag pattern here to secure it to the back beam. So you've got these holes across your rear beam. Take the halfway point here up at the dowel between these 2 holes and pull that through. Don't have to worry about length or slackness at this point. Come around and put the string through the next hole on the beam. Again, determine the halfway point up here at the dowel. Pull that through. And it's a little bit like stitching. Halfway point again. And when we come back here, we're going to go through the front side to correspond to how it looks over here on the other side. And we're going to push that through. And bring the loop up and put it around the head of that screw over here. And now you can see we've got kind of a loose string here. Doesn't look very pretty. Take your dowel out of the warp helper and maybe start to wind this back just a little bit, but you want to wiggle this dowel to kind of get the lengths of these various segments approximately the same. The idea is when you get this string, this dowel back to the beam, the dowel and the beam will be parallel. And so I think I've got a fairly good start there. Let me pull this back. We'll start to wind that string on, and as we get back to the rear beam, just look at it here. Is it parallel with that beam? If necessary, wiggle a little bit more, and you're going to drop it down onto the beam, making sure it's not on the ratchet on one side or on the head of a screw on either side here. And now we're ready to wind the warp onto the back beam. This is a step in weaving that with smaller looms and even larger looms gives beginning weavers and even experienced weavers a fit, because this may be the most important step in warping your loom. You need to get your warp on the back beam so that all these ends, these strings, these pieces of yarn are wrapped on that beam where each end has the same tension on them. And you want the same tension over here on one side as you have on the other. You want the same tension as when you begin to wind on as when you come to the far end here. If you don't have good tension on your warp, it's not consistent. Left to right, back to front. As you start to weave, you're going to progressively get more and more problems. Your tension won't stay the way it's supposed to be. The ends typically over here on any weaving project will begin to collapse on themselves, to get mushy. So as you weave and you take your project off the loom, it won't look as good. So in the past, people have used a variety of products, typically with small looms, heavy craft paper, brown paper, paper bag type material, or rolled corrugated cardboard. And they would cut that and they would wind that on as they wind on the loom. But if you have good tension on your warp, and you do want good tension on your warp, you want this warp to be tight, and you do have to use a second person to do this. You can't do this step by yourself. It just won't work well. But you want very good tension, quite a bit of tension. But with the paper and the cardboard, it wasn't stiff enough to hold the warp up the way you'd like. So the Kromskis are making what we're calling beam sticks. These are flat sticks. They're for length to fit the various looms. They can certainly be used on the Kromski Harps, but they can be used on any loom that is an appropriate width. And what we're going to do next is show you how to use these warp sticks as we wind the warp onto the back beam. We're going to be setting these in on top of the warp, so they're wound right in with the warp. The advantage is that they're stiff. They won't collapse on us across from left to right. They're consistent. You can put a lot of tension on them, and they don't bed down into the warp that's underneath them. And now you can tension that warp so it's as high as you want to make it, and it should be pretty tight, and then simply bring this warp back around the beam, and we're going to be slipping in these warp sticks. So let's do that next. I'm going to need a helper here. We're going to have somebody tensioning this warp on the other side. They'll walk that warp into us, but they'll keep a consistent tension on it, and I'll be winding on and putting these sticks on as we go. You'll want to have your loom either on a stand like this or clamped to a table, because you want the person holding the warp on the other end to be pulling it. You don't want that loom to be pulled away. So here on the stand, I've got my feet on the base of the stand so I can hold this loom so it doesn't move. If you clamp it to a table, that'll be great, because the table won't move and you'll be able to get that appropriate tension that you need. So get ready when you do this to get it on a stand or clamp it to a table. Get that second person for 5 or 10 minutes that you need to get a warp on. We're going to be putting on a warp that's about 2.5 yards long. We're going to end up using probably 7 to 10 of these sticks. So you can see if you're doing a 5-yard warp, you might want to have a dozen or 2 of these sticks ready to use. You can never use too many. And if you have them, you never want to use too few. So the next step here will just be to have this warp tension. Let's show you how we wind it on. All right, we're going to take these sticks now and we're going to use those to create our foundation. And this is going to be the best foundation you've ever had. It's going to be the best warp you've ever had, and you'll want to use this on every project that you have. Most importantly, I've got someone on the far end of the warp. They're putting tension on it, and they're going to keep that tension consistent as we wind it on. You can see this is not something you can do by yourself, so just save yourself some time and get that second person for 5 or 10 minutes to help you. So we're going to start winding on. We're going to keep that tension on, and as we go around, we're going to start slipping in these sticks, and they just sit flat. And when we add the next one, and you want to do this kind of randomly, you don't want the previous stick having another stick right on top of it, so work themselves around. You don't want the warp going down in itself, so a stick every once in a while here is going to give you that good warp that you want. Let's slip another one in here. Remember, I said this warp is about 2.5 yards long, and we're going to end up using 8 or 10 of these sticks. Keep the tension up. You can't use too many sticks. Let me back up and put one right here. I like the looks of it right there. And you're going to bring that warp in until you're just on the other side of your heddle, where you're going to then be set up to do your tying on to the front beam. Keep these sticks away from the ratchets on this side, so your pawl here can engage the ratchet. Keep the tension up. I think I like a stick right there. Make sure these sticks are put on parallel with the beam. We're going to come a little bit further. And maybe one more about right here. And now we can release the tension on the other side, lock the back beam in place so it can't go forward, and you've got yourself back here a very tight, very consistent, very uniform tensioned warp from left to right, from beginning to end. You're going to tie onto the other side. If you want to use that zigzag method, take your longer string and tie onto that dowel over there once you tie the warp ends to the dowel, and believe me, this is going to be the best gift you can give yourself, is a well-tensioned warp back here. Tim again for New Voyager Trading. Thanks for watching.